What's going on, guys? Today, I'm gonna talk about a little analysis I'm gonna do on Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. I just finished rewatching it, and man, there's a lot of stuff that I saw that I remembered the first time I watched it. There's a lot of new things I realized about the show as well. But it's a great show, and I just want to talk about analysis of some of the characters and the overall show, some of the writing, some things I liked, and basically everything in the show. So, the core premise of the show, it's an anime. It's got two different versions, Full Metal Alchemist and this Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. I haven't actually watched the original, but I do know a little bit about it. I do plan on watching it eventually, but as of now, I've only seen Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, and I just finished rewatching it. So the core premise of the show, so it's kind of about how does the ambition of humans and the pursuit of power ethically stand when it comes to hurting people and other living beings, and the cost of hurting others to pursue things like science and progression. So in this show, we see Edward, the main character, Edward Elric. He loses his arm and his leg, and it's like the saying, oh, this costs an arm and a leg. And it's kind of goes like he sacrifices it to gain power. He he gained power. He gained the power to do alchemy without a transmutation circle, but he was trying to bring his mother back. Or actually, no, he brought his brother back. He lost his brother trying to bring his mother back. So his brother Alphonse Elric, so they try to bring his mother back. He loses his whole body. Then Edward loses his arm and his leg trying to bring them back, and then um that whole scene and kind of the most of the show kind of it's a lot of heavy themes of sacrifice and what you are willing to sacrifice, and how sometimes it's better to accept reality than to try to change it, and also about the sacrifices people have to make when they try to progress things like science and what we know about the world. This is also it's a lot. It's a little bit of a political show, not like the politics we see in the real world, but it's more of how corruption and big picture stuff when it comes to politics. There's a conspiracy about the government in the show and how they're not really for the people. They're actually being ran by entities that people don't even know about. There's a lot of characters in the show that aren't alchemists. They don't even know about how alchemy works. So they wouldn't understand anything that we see in the show. There's political and philosophical ideas that turn into the idea of being a human or a human-like creature, and then trying to obtain and then even obtaining the power of God. That's a theme that's throughout the entire show, especially towards the end. Achieving the power of a deity, of a god, achieving the power of something beyond human. Um, and how would that affect you? How would that make you feel? Another core premise I think in the show is the bond of the two brothers. We see the two brothers; they're kind of both like the main character. Edward's definitely more of the main character, but we kind of see their bond. They have a lot of arguments. They even have some disagreements. I think it's important that even though they have the same goal, they don't always agree. Now they're very heavily aligned in most things, but they don't always agree with each other's mindsets, and that is very important because it shows that even if you disagree with somebody on how to reach a goal, you guys can still work together to reach that goal, as long as you want the same goals. And it also shows how they deal with arguments and disagreements. So the first thing I want to talk about is equivalent exchange. So equivalent exchange is kind of the power system, I guess you can say. Well, the power system is alchemy. And equivalent exchange is the law that power system follows. So anytime you do something, you need to give something of equal value. So if you wanted to create a diamond, you need to give something that's equal value of the diamond. To gain something, something equal value must be given. And so this seems to be both a good thing and a bad thing throughout the story. And it can make alchemists seem kind of apathetic towards other people because they see things through a very black and white lens. And I think that's another big theme in the show, is not everything is black and white. People with science can see everything in black and white as progression is good and stagnation is bad. But that's not always the case. Sometimes, in order to progress, you will have to give up something that nobody would ever be willing to give up. But then we see people in the show that are willing to give up stuff that your average person wouldn't be going to give up. Like maybe family, maybe a family member, maybe things, gold, riches, fame, sometimes their own life. So that's a theme. And then also a lot of times the alchemists, they're basically kind of like scientists in a way. They seem a little apathetic towards other people and how they don't care about other people's feelings, and they're only focused on science and like their career. That is a theme throughout the show. I think that they can seem that way. Another theme is, so how does equivalent exchange kind of turn into the idea of good versus evil? So there's good alchemists in the show for sure. Like also we see the main character is a good guy and he's an alchemist and a couple people around him. There's also evil alchemists that use alchemy to achieve goals that are more sinister and self-centered and not for the good of the people. Does Edward does Edward's choice of sacrificing his alchemy at the very end of the show, does that present growth as a person, or do you think he would take it back if he could? So at the end of the show, we see that Edward, he gives up his alchemy, um, or at least the ability to. I don't remember exactly. Did he give it up? He either gave it up or he gave it using not using a transmutation circle. But he got his body back, and he learned a lot. He learned. I think he gave up his alchemy completely. He learned a lot about himself and what it means to grow as a person. He kind of lost his ego a lot because now the one thing that he was kind of went with his entire life, he was always good at alchemy. Now he doesn't have that. But it's at the very end of the show when he learns that sometimes it's better to ground yourself and center yourself in order to be a better person. And there's a lot of vices we have that raise our ego. Vices aren't always something like drugs or alcohol. They can also be something like what you're good at. Like if you're really good at basketball and you kind of hark on that in every single argument, and that's kind of gives you an inflated ego because you think, well, I'm better than this person at basketball. Because obviously, if you're better than somebody in basketball, that's the lens you're going to think through. Well, they might be better than you at drawing, but they might not see that as necessarily the end all be all in every argument. So I think him losing his alchemy at the end of the show really presents growth as a person, and it's a contrast from the beginning of the show when he had a little more of an ego. But he's not like a prideful person, but he had an ego. I would say maybe a little prideful, but it was more of an ego than it is like a pride. Like he would do just things out of the act that he almost has to feel like a hero. So Edward. So let's talk about Edward a little more for a second. So he's driven by guilt and then his ego also, but he's stripped of both by the end. So at the very beginning, he's driven by the guilt of everything. Everything he does in the show. It's driven by two different things: either guilt or ego/pride. So in the beginning, he wants to get his brother's body back. All he's worried about is his brother. He feels very guilty about his brother losing his body because they lost it when they were trying to bring their mother back to life. Now, at first, I wasn't quite sure why he felt so guilty, because they both agreed to do it, but then I guess I kind of realized since he was the one that brought his brother back and put him in the suit of armor, that's part of the reason that he felt that way. And then also his ego did cause him to do certain things throughout the show that maybe weren't the best decision, and also he was a little emotional at times. He did things sometimes out of anger, sometimes out of sadness, and sometimes out of fear. So he's not necessarily like this stoic person, but he's this person that's very, like, he has strong morals. But a lot of people in the show have very strong morals, and I mean that by, like, they're very set in their ways and they don't want to change their morality. And they won't confine to other people's morality either. But Edward, he's driven by guilt and pride a lot throughout the show. Pride, aka ego. He's also driven by responsibility. Now, he has this responsibility of that he needs to kind of save everybody. He needs to save the country. But the question I was trying to figure out is, why does he feel that way? Why does he have such a high need of responsibility? Why is he responsible for saving the country? Is it because of his power? Is that the exchange? Does he get all this power, but he has to use it to save everyone? I mean, maybe that's how he feels. That could be kind of the lens that he looks at it through when he kind of looks at, why. Because he doesn't ever ask. I don't remember any time where he asks himself, why do I feel like I have to save everybody? He just always, that's just his state of being. So I think pride or pride and ego I kind of use interchangeably. I think ego is a big aspect of Ed's character. Why does he take pride in being a good alchemist? He loses that in the end. Is it because he's saving people? Is that why he takes pride in it? Countless people also die during the show. I think it's finally in the end he realized that he has to ask for help. He realized that he can't do everything by himself. The responsibility of the whole country isn't on his shoulders alone, and really makes him feel that really makes him understand. And I think that's the thing with a lot of characters who have big egos, who have big prides, that aren't necessarily villains. Because most people, I think, in shows, most heroes do have a lot of pride, but it's not really shown in a negative way. I think in this show, the hero who does have a lot of pride, it's still shown as a negative emotion. Because in the end, he realizes he can't do everything himself. There's a lot of people in the show who aren't alchemists and who aren't strong, but they end up helping in some way. And I think that it's good that that's the case. I think it really shows, nobody alone can overthrow something. Overthrow, nobody can alone can do a revolution. Because that's kind of what this show's about. It's about a revolution. And the military state that they built, it's very tough to overthrow something like that because so many people believe in the system. And that mimics some things that are going on in the world right now, where there's a lot of things that are going on that aren't that good, but we believe in a system so much that we can't overthrow it because why would we? I'm going to lose my comfort, I'm going to lose my house, I have a family to take care of, and that's how a lot of people in the show feel. But you got to ask yourself, what do I stay in the game? And a lot of characters in the show, they have a lot of people they want to protect. And so that's why they're willing to put things aside. Sometimes Ed, I feel like, did put aside his ego. Sometimes he did put aside his pride. Other characters put aside things that they cared about in order to achieve the bigger picture. And they work together. And that kind of goes back to community and the unification of people have different skill sets. And we kind of saw that. They came up with plans. Some people were good leaders. Some people were good fighters. Some people were good distractions. Some people were good at healing and repairing. There's doctors in the show. They play their part. Some people are just dangerous just from being alive. Their life is worth something because they were a lot of characters. Some characters were going to be used as sacrifices, and so it's interesting to see how they were able to work together and realize their strengths and differences. Because a lot of the times you kind of just see teams. It's a little more shallow in other shows. I think this show really nailed it on the head. As they didn't really agree a lot of the time, but they were still able to work together to achieve the goal. So let's talk about Edward's brother Alphonse. So Alphonse is very interesting because he's almost kind of like Edward if he didn't have an ego in a way. He's and obviously I'm not saying he doesn't have an ego at all, but he's very willing to sacrifice things. Well, he's very selfless throughout the entire show. He is able to express his emotions. I would describe him as he's gentle, but he's very brave. He's able to express his emotions in a way that I think Edward isn't able to. He's able to kind of talk about how he really feels. While Edward feels like, having this responsibility of saving everybody around them, he feels like he has to be this larger than life, undefeatable person that nobody can crack, nobody can get a read on, and he kind of want to keep people guessing. Alphonse is very more straightforward, and he wants you to know how he feels. He wants you to know he's a nice person, and he cares about, he cares about you, he cares about someone else. He wants you to know exactly how he feels. Well, I think that's the main difference between them. Is Edward wants you to keep guessing. He wants you to not know his next move. Alphonse wants you to know what's he going to do because he knows it's right. And neither of them are necessarily wrong, but obviously people might go with Alphonse more just because he's a little more straightforward and then also nice about it. It's a hard character to nail. There's a lot of characters. I think people might call it altruism. Altruism. It's a very hard concept to nail with a character because they can almost seem like they're, when you're watching a show, you don't want to be reminded you're watching a show. You want to be sucked into the story. So when you have characters that really embody selflessness, sometimes they can be so selfless. It's almost like this isn't real. But he's human enough, and it's also ironic because he spends the entire show inside of a. He doesn't have his body. He doesn't look like a human. His soul is engraved into his suit of armor, and that's how we see him throughout the show. And this is big brass armor, like intimidating guy, but he's like the most gentle person. And that's the funny thing in the show. There's like this trope where everybody kind of sees him as everybody thinks he's his brother because he's like made out of metal and stuff, but his character, they really nailed it with his character. He's very empathetic, and he questions his own existence a lot. He asks questions like, "Am I even real?" I think that's actually a direct quote. I don't know exactly, but I'm pretty sure he said something like, "Am I even real?" And that's just very, I have a video about metaphysics, but you talk about, imagine you lived your life inside of a body that wasn't yours. How would you even feel? Would you question your existence, or would you just go along with it? Would you accept that body that maybe gave you something like you didn't have to sleep or you didn't have to eat, or would you want to go back to your human body where you could feel things, you could feel warmth, and you could eat delicious food? Everything has a cost, and that goes back to equivalent exchange and everything about it. I mean, you could lose your mind. You could think yourself better than humans. You could think yourself worse than humans. Anything could happen. Um, I think by the end of the show, Alphonse learns a certain type of self worth. He learns that although he wants to help everyone, he has to also put himself in there. Maybe not always first, but if something happens to him, if he doesn't put himself first, something happens to him. And then when something happens to him, he can't help anybody. So to help others, you have to help yourself first sometimes. And I think he really learns that at the end. And he gets exactly what he was searching for the entire show. So I think he really learned a lesson in self-worth, and he answered a couple of his questions about existence and who he is. Now, both brothers, Edward is more about humility. I think Alphonse is a little more about self-identity. I think they both bounce off of each other perfectly, and they have very good chemistry. Because brotherly bonds, I don't have any brothers, but I could only imagine what it would feel like to have somebody that's like, it's definitely, I mean, I could only imagine it's a different type of feeling. Now, let's kind of switch to the antagonist for a second. Let's talk about the homunculi in the show. So you talk about the homunculi, obviously you know what they represent. They all represent the seven deadly sins. Um, so you talk about pride. So pride, he's very interesting in the show. We don't know who he is at first, but I think he's kind of the illusion of perfection. He's this guy. He was a human. Then they kind of put the philosopher's stone inside of him. They injected it with him. I think he's all about making a perfect nation, and it's through control and it's through surveillance. He he worked with other homunculi that watch everything. They can see everyone, and he also tries to control everybody as much as he can. And I think he's a very good example of kind of like he's very charming at the beginning, and then we find out who he really is, and it's just very interesting seeing the progression throughout the show, and then the way he dies when he's fighting Scar. It's very interesting. So I think he represents the illusion of perfection. So Wrath I think is definitely kind of like weaponized leadership. Oh wait, you know what? I was talking about pride. I meant to be talking about Fuhrer. I was talking about the kid Pride. He has, yeah, let me go back to Pride for a second. So everything I just said about um Pride, I actually meant that to say about I got them mixed up. Pride is the kid to Wrath, the Fuhrer. I forgot his name. Salim. Salim was Pride. Now, Pride was, as the kid, he was a very interesting character because, well, and a lot like Wrath too. You didn't know who he was at first, and it was a good reveal when you found out who he was. It was interesting to see how he interacted with the characters before he knew who he was versus afterwards. Now, Wrath, going over to Wrath, like what I said about Wrath, Wrath was a little more of weaponized leadership. Now Wrath and Pride had a very close relationship, and seeing Wrath die fighting Scar was very interesting because Scar's story, I can make a whole different video on Scar. I love Scar's character. But Pride was, he acted like he was a lot better than humans. And in the end, it was he got defeated by humans multiple times, and He even worked alongside some, and Kimley helped defeat him, and he tried, I think he tried going into Ed's body, and then Kimley didn't allow it, and it was very interesting because he was so prideful throughout the show, and he tried to save his own life by turning into a human, the human that he talked down upon the entire show. And then Bradley weaponized leadership. That's another thing that I think is interesting, the way that they used him to manipulate everybody. Then we have Lust. Now, Lust, I think, honestly, I don't know how many dimensions I could really give her. She's interesting. I think she's kind of the baseline we get for the homunculus, what they are, how strong they are. I think she the first one to die. I think she was the first one to die. And I can make a whole other video about the homunculuses as well, or the homunculi. Um, she was very interesting because she set the standard for, I think, how strong they were. And she might even have been one of the weaker ones, but she was still strong. And it was interesting watching her in the first half kind of manipulate people and using her appearance to get kind of whatever information she needed. But one that's a little more interested was Envy. Envy was very interesting throughout the entire show. They acted superior to everybody, but in reality they were jealous and they had a lot of self-hatred. And in the end, they took the easy way out. And they learned a lot about who they are. And Envy, they were jealous of humans, but they acted better than the entire time. And it's a form of self-hatred and deflection that you don't see with many characters, but with them, they really nailed it with Envy. Greed, he was very interesting. He breaks from the pack, and it shows that, homunculi, they're capable of change. And does this defection show that the homunculi, do they have autonomy? I mean, are they forced to believe in certain things? I mean, there's other times in the show where homunculi kind of have their own agenda, but not necessarily all the time. I mean, we see with certain ones, they follow their father to the end, but other ones, like Greed, he defects multiple times. And so that kind of interesting because it shows maybe, are they true beings? They have the power to, if a robot had a power to leave its master and go of its own, how much autonomy do they really have? Are they controlling their self or is it something else? So Gluttony. So talking about Gluttony is very interesting. Or actually, he's probably one of the less interesting ones. He was very simple in a way, which I thought was interesting because there's a couple different. Two of the homunculi kind of didn't really have their own autonomy, a lot less autonomy than the other ones. He wasn't as fleshed out as the other sins, but that's kind of the point with him because he's just a mindless and he consumes. And but he was very upset when Lust died, so clearly he had emotions and he had allegiances and he had feelings and relationships with other people and the other homunculi. Um, but he was a lot like Sloth. Well, Sloth is apathy. Sloth was the embodiment of apathy, and that's destructive. It was showing kind of how you don't care about, you just do whatever you can to rest. So if they were like, if somebody was like ordered you to like, okay, you need to destroy this town, and then you can finally take a nap. You might just do it so you can get your way. You don't care about morals. You don't care about ethics. You just do whatever you want so you can finally rest and relax. And another interesting about them is they weren't necessarily their own entities, the homunculi, but they were an extension of Father. Now, Father he's the big bad of the show. He's the main antagonist, so you don't even see him for like the first half of the show. But you get hints about him throughout the show, and then when you finally see him, it's very interesting because he looks like Edward and Alphonse's father. But the interesting thing about Father is that if greed is an extension of him, and his stripped greed of sin, why was greed the one that was able to change? Why was greed the one able to defect in the end completely without even knowing that they had lost? He was able to defect. He had his own autonomy. So it's very interesting seeing that. Now let's talk about Father for a second. So Father, like I said, he is the main antagonist. So he wants to ascend and reach godhood. He sees humans as beneath him, and in a way, he's kind of hollow. He doesn't really know exactly what he wants. He just wants power and to accumulate as much as he can. I think he wants to escape pain and he wants to escape responsibility because he does awful things through that the entire show. He refuses to acknowledge any emotional bonds, and as we see in, I think Xerxes, I think was the name of the town. He killed, or he, I guess, well, he killed, but he trapped the souls of hundreds of thousands of people. And he refuses to acknowledge his emotions. He refuses to acknowledge anything that happened. And his story is somewhat of a warning of what happens when intelligence goes unchecked and when intelligence wants too much. The smartest person on the earth might be able to achieve something great, but if they have to kill, hurt, torture, and harm so many people and other living creatures, animals, and anything, isn't necessarily worth it. And sometimes you don't even know if he's going to get results. It's a test, it's a hypothesis. So he just knows if he does this, something could happen, not that it will happen. He went from nothing but a dwarf in a jar to having immense strength and power. That changes you permanently. At the beginning, he was called a dwarf in a jar, and that's what Hohenheim calls him throughout the show. He was nothing. He was stuck in a glass flask, and now he's he's this person with infinite power and infinite knowledge. It changes no matter whether you're a human or another being. It changes you permanently. What does the dwarf represent? I think it can represent the problems that occur when you're very thirsty for progression and the problems with what it takes to achieve very big goals. If you want to achieve the ability to make some type of medicine, but you have to constantly test out different things on animals and humans, it's not necessarily worth it. And obviously, we know when you look at history, we've seen different times where humanity has done horrible things to other humans in order to test the limits of science, the limits of medicine, the limits of, maybe even spirituality. It's a lot that history has shown us. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but that doesn't necessarily mean we have to do it. Sometimes progression can lead us down paths that are evil, that aren't good. So let's talk about the truth for a second. So truth, some people call him the truth, some people call him truth. So he's kind of like the deity of the world. He calls himself God at one point, but he also says something like, I'm you. And he also takes the appearance of whoever he's talking to. So when he's talking to a woman, you know, when he's talking to Edward and Alphonse's trainer, and I can make a whole nother video on her too. Let me know in the comments if you guys want to see a video on certain characters or certain themes in the show or other shows. I'm completely ready to make it. But we see him when he's Alphonse's and Edward's instructor. When he's talking to her, she's a taller, skinny woman. He takes the form of a taller, skinny woman. He has he mimics the hairdo. When he's talking to Edward, he's missing his arm and his leg. That's kind of what you see. He has his arm and his leg. Same thing with Alphonse. He's missing his whole body. When we see him talking to Roy Mustang, he takes his appearance. When we see him talking to the dwarf in the jar, it's kind of like a spiky ball. He takes the appearance of a spiky ball with like one eye. And then there's this concept in the show called all is one, one is all, and that kind of shows like not necessarily that a human being is God, but that it's the God in the show is the kind of inside of the human being, almost like he is them in a way. But he punishes hubris. Throughout the show, we see it constantly. People try to obtain the power of God. They try to obtain power that they shouldn't have, and he punishes them for it. He doesn't punish ignorance, though. When people do something not knowing what they're doing, that's not necessarily what he punishes. He punishes pride, but not necessarily ignorance. Now, when he takes away Roy Mustang's sight, that was one thing I was a little unsure about, because why would he need to do that? I did think because he was kind of forced into it, but that was something he was able to get back with the Philosopher's Stone at the end, and we don't see that happen, but it's implied. Maybe that was part of a plan. Maybe he knew that was happening. I don't know. I'm not sure. He does speak somewhat in riddles, and is a little hard to understand him sometimes. And this is another person that I might make a whole video about because he's just so interesting. I mean, you don't even see him that often, but when you do, man, is he interesting. And like I said before, when he takes the shape of a person standing before him or whatever creature is standing before him, it makes you think. And he's got the door of knowledge, and then when you go through that, you lose something, but you gain the ability to transmutate without a circle, without a transmutation circle, or perform alchemy without it. So that's just very interesting itself because it's like from the limited perspective of the person, maybe that's what they see him as themselves. But let's ground a little bit more. Let's talk about political war or political power and science and war itself. So there were atrocities committed to the people of Ishval. There was a genocide. Soldiers did not speak up, with a couple exceptions, as like Armstrong. In the end, in order to move on from what happened, they needed to acknowledge it. Okay, they couldn't ignore it because acknowledging it shows that you learned a lesson. See, when you ignore something that you did in the past, when you ignore a mistake, you're acting like it never happened, and there was no lesson that needed to be learned. But in this case, there was a lesson that needed to be learned because the people of Ishval were slaughtered completely, and it was all started with the idea of what Father wanted. He wanted to cause a revolution from them. They fought back. Some of them did, some of them didn't. But you see throughout the show, a lot of Ishvalan people are very peaceful people. Okay, they believe in a lot of mercy. They believe in a lot of you know forgiving those that did wrong to them, and that's very interesting because that's a lot of things that Jesus teaches. I think they have very Christian morals of forgiving those that do wrong to you, praying for those that prosecute you, and it's very interesting. I definitely saw a correlation there. But acknowledging something, see, when you acknowledge the past, you're able to figure out what went wrong and build off of that. But when you ignore history, you're destined to repeat it. Those that ignore history are destined to repeat it. It's a saying. Roy Mustang wanted to create a reform from within. So Roy Mustang, he's not necessarily always the best person. He contributed to the slaughter of Ishfallen, but from within the government, he wanted to reform people. He didn't want to do a revolution. He wanted to find the source of evil on the inside, kill it, and then let it spread outwards. In the end, he kind of did both, but he becomes the Führer, or at least that's implied. He becomes the Führer, and he becomes the person with all the power, and he wants to reform, and he does in the end help people in Ishval rebuild and reclaim their land. But he's got a very interesting ideology. Scar. So the Scar is a very interesting character when it comes to the politics and the war of the show. He's a surviving member of the Ishval. He was saved by the same people that were slaughtering him. He was saved by two of the nurses that were Winry's parents, and they were from Central, I think, or they were at least from no, they were from Winry, who lived in the small town, but they were from that area, and they were on the side that was killing them. But she saved them because they were willing to save anybody. They saved everybody, but he killed them, and he killed everybody. He killed anybody that he thought was an enemy, whether they were trying to help him or not. And he wanted revenge at first, and I love this about him. Then he wanted a reclamation. He wanted to forgive those that hurt him. He did a lot of harm to people that hurt him. I think, in a way, he got enough revenge. He was understanding. It's not always about getting revenge. Sometimes it's about forgiveness. See, and that's what a lot of his people believed in. He was one of the only Fallen that really wanted to get revenge. I think there were maybe some, but there were a couple of different ones that there was the one that worked up north with um, Armstrong, the other Armstrong, and she appointed him. He worked his way through the ranks, and he worked very hard. And then we see in the end he forgave people, but he was also forgiven because he was ready to accept revenge from somebody, but because he knows what it's like to want revenge. But when he was able to see that the person that would justifiably have gotten revenge on him forgave him, that's really what changed his mindset into Maybe I have to forgive the people because even if he did damage to the people that hurt him, when does it get to the point where he does so much damage that he's now in the wrong? That's the problem. Where is the line? Is it just everybody? He can kill everybody? No, I don't think that's the case. I think the case is there's a line, and see, forgiveness isn't always about the person that needs forgiveness. It's the person that gives forgiveness is letting themselves be free of this bond and this feeling. This show, I think one of the reasons I like this show so much is because when it comes to so many things, religion, science, war, politics, self-identity, pride, sins, it doesn't give, it doesn't go for easy answers. It acknowledges the fact that sometimes you just don't know something, and that's okay. Sometimes you just don't know, and you have to figure it out as you go along. Maybe you never figure it out, but the people around you, that's what they're there for. They're there to help you, and so when you accept that, it just makes everything so much easier. And the show just doesn't go for easy answers. It goes for the hard ones. It goes for hard questions, and it doesn't give easy answers. So let's talk about the science once again in the show. So the idea of science in the show, it shows the consequences of trying to do anything for the name of science and progression. Obviously, there's Shao Tucker. There's other people that have hurt others in order to gain science. It really shows progression isn't always good in the name of science. In the real world, right now, we can compare this to something like AI, artificial intelligence, and other technologies that progress and they're controversial, like surveillance and technology that take jobs away. We look at what's going on in the world now, we see AI. What is the limits of AI? Maybe there are no limits. Is that necessarily a good thing? Or maybe we need to put some type of restraint on them? It's a very interesting concept because you don't always know what you need to do in order to achieve your goals. And sometimes they can be things that you were never prepared to give up. Sometimes you have to give up things you were never prepared to give up. Sometimes you might gain something you didn't think you would ever gain. But it's a lot of mystery when it comes to it. And that's kind of what science is about. But you have to understand there's still a lot at stake. And then religion in the show. Religion is very interesting. So actually at the very beginning, there's this guy that's kind of acting like there's this religion that forms around this guy. He's doing all these crazy miracles and stuff because he has a philosopher's stone. And I think it might actually be like a tiny bit of a philosopher's stone or even a fake one. But he's a false religious idol. He's using the philosopher's stone to act as he has otherworldly powers. It kind of shows how easily people can be false idols and how much they can lie. And that's one of the 10 Commandments is don't follow false idols. Don't believe in them. One of the 10 Commandments from the Bible, from Moses, is, people will act like they have magic. People people will be very good at something. They're very good at making music. They're very good at a sport, but you can't idolize them because they're still just human. And I think it's called Leoism. The guy's name is like Leo or something. It shows how the truth can become very muddied. Okay, it can become muddled. I think that's what I meant to say. By false teachers, false prophets, false teachers, false idols. It shows the show is, and there's a lot of them. Father is another one of them. There's he doesn't necessarily have a religion around him, but he has a lot of he's got followers and he's got a lot of minions. But you really see when you get to like the bottom of his army, they're not necessarily always loyal. I mean, he's got criminals. You talk about the Chopper guy, Barry the Chopper. He works for him and then he defects because what does he have to offer him anymore? You know, some people are only willing to go with whoever has most to offer him, and that's another thing. You shouldn't necessarily always go with whoever has the most to offer you. Sometimes you might want to go with something else. So I think the key takeaways of the show are the loss of ego is necessary for true growth. You don't have to agree with people around you in order to reach the same goal as they want to. Sometimes you can work together and still disagree. Doing anything in the name of science is not always just. Sometimes there's limits. Sometimes there's thresholds that you don't want to um, go over. Um, at first, the series kind of sees religion. I think it kind of puts religion into a way as it's misguided. But as you watch on, it kind of shows the misuse of science. And it kind of shows the correlation that science and religion can work together. And it shows how science will make you want to reach to the stars and reach God, and then religion will ground you and make you realize that there's morals and ethics to everything. And sometimes you have to follow them very strictly, and you can't conform for anything. Because once you conform, it's over. You lost. Even once. Doing anything in the name of science isn't always just. That's another key takeaway. I might have already said that, but there are limits, and yes, progression is very good, but so is humanity, and keeping your humanity as a person and keeping humanity as a society. And another thing is, in order to reach your goals, sometimes you need to sacrifice something, and sometimes it's not worth it. Sometimes your goals are so unreachable. I mean, everybody wants to be a billionaire. They don't want to have to worry about money, but that might mean you have to focus on your career so much. You can't focus on something like having friends. You can't focus on having a good time. You can't focus on doing things you like playing sports or playing video games or watching anime. You got to constantly be focusing on your career and growing money. You can't focus on a family. Some people's idea of success is having a family, going on vacation, having a little bit of money in the bank, or maybe none, just having a place to live, eating decent food, having a good family that you love, being around people you like. Humans are social creatures. And this show shows how working together as a cohesive group is very important to achieve a goal, even if you don't agree with everybody in that group. Right now in society, we're at a point where everybody's divided. I think that's awful. I think that's very manufactured, and I think if we are able to work together, we can achieve things. I mean, humans have so much potential to achieve things beyond our belief. We can make life paradise on earth for everybody if we really just work together. And I think right now, there's a lot of people that are benefiting from division. And whether you're religious or it's about politics, we see all, or science, we see it all in the show. The show shows a better world isn't just made up by one type of person. A good world is made up by everyone, all different types of people, and that's what the show shows. Whether it's has to do with what you believe in or what you're fighting for. Everybody's fighting for a better world, and that's when we realize when we can work together and not just worried about the details all the time, worry about the bigger picture. That's when things truly change, and that's when the world becomes a better place. Truly. But yeah, if you like this analysis on the show, let me know. Let me know if there's any other shows, animes, books, video games, movies you want to see me do an analysis on. I've seen a lot of different, of all of them. If there's a manga or a comic you want me to do an analysis on, let me know. I will look into it. I will, see. Maybe I've already read it. Maybe I'll start reading it. Books. I've read a decent amount of books, but there's a lot out there, and I love, media and fiction. And if there's any non-fiction books you want me to talk about, let me know. Let me know what type of videos you want to see on the channel. Give me any suggestions, anything you want to see out of me. If you like the video, drop a like on the video and let me know if there's any future content you want to see. And yeah, if you want to see more content like this, subscribe and leave a comment down below what you want to see next and any suggestions you have. And yeah, I hope everybody has a good day.